Kurosawa's dismissal from Tora reads, at first, like another case of careless Hollywood mistreatment of a great auteur. But surprisingly, 20th Century Fox appears to have made a considerate effort to keep Kurosawa as their director. The studio initially appeared willing to give him time to rest before continuing his work, but miscommunication between Kurosawa's offices and the American producers was getting worse. In January 1969, Kurosawa sent a telegram to the studio saying that he was willing to pay for the completion of the film with his own money if it meant he could continue directing. In February, the studio sent Richard Zanuck to Japan to meet with Kurosawa about finishing the movie. Kurosawa didn't show up, apparently because he was not informed of the meeting until it was too late. It's not clear exactly what happened, but Stuart Galbraith writes that there was some suspicious activity involving the general manager of Kurosawa's company, Tetsu Aoyagi. Aoyagi was accused of withholding information and conspiring behind Kurosawa's back, all of which he fervently denied. It's possible Aoyagi just got caught in the crosshairs of a very messy situation. Kurosawa was definitely not in a healthy mental space. Galbraith reports that during production of Tora, the director seemingly became convinced he was being pursued by assassins, and that his safety was in imminent danger. After Aoyagi quit Kurosawa's company, he never worked in the film industry again. Tora was finished without Kurosawa's involvement, and Runaway Train was abandoned. Kinji Fukasaku and Toshio Masuda were hired as Kurosawa's replacements, the former to handle effect sequences, the latter to handle dialogue scenes. Both were solid directors and reliable journeymen, known for their speed and efficiency. Possible alternatives considered by the studio included Masaki Kobayashi, Kihachi Okamoto, Kon Ichikawa, Noboru Nakamura, and maybe even Toshiro Mifune. All of Kurosawa's footage was scrapped, the film was recast, and after going 3 times over its original budget, Tora was completed and released in September of 1970. The finished film is amazingly harmonious, considering all the production chaos, and contains some stunning effects work and aerial photography. The story is a bit dry. We never grow very attached to any of the characters, or develop an emotional investment in the plot, one of the drawbacks to a film that puts historical accuracy above drama. But the film does effectively convey a sense of foreboding doom. Tora was negatively received upon release, and underperformed at the box office, which further damaged the studio. By this time, American movie tastes were changing. Fox unexpectedly had a much bigger hit that year with Robert Altman's subversive war comedy, MASH, which had cost only a fraction of Tora and grossed more than twice as much at the box office. The new Hollywood was arriving. Runaway Train would eventually be made as well. 15 years later, in 1985, the script turned up in the hands of Cannon Films. Cannon was mostly known for low-budget 80s action movies and Chuck Norris vehicles, but their output also included independent dramas, like John G. Avildsen's Joe, John Cassavetes' Love Streams, and Jean-Luc Godard's memorably inexplicable King Lear. The script was heavily rewritten by George Milicevic, Paul Zindel, and crime writer Edward Bunker, perhaps best remembered as Mr. Blue in Reservoir Dogs. An opening prison sequence was added to include more backstory, the setting was changed to Alaska, there was now a human antagonist in the form of a crazed warden played by John P. Ryan, and at the end, we never actually see the train come to a stop. Jon Voight, Eric Roberts, and Rebecca De Mornay starred, with Andrei Konchalovsky, a Russian filmmaker who had worked on some of the early films of Andrei Tarkovsky, directing. The film is very campy, with every actor sneering, snarling, and shouting every last line of dialogue. A lofty strain of existential themes is inserted awkwardly, resulting in unintentional humor, like when De Mornay asks Voight's character, "What are you, an animal?" And he responds, "Worse, human." It also marked the acting debut of the great Danny Trejo. Somehow the film received very positive reviews upon release, even several Oscar nominations, and it maintains a strong cult following to this day. This might be due mainly to the film's technical achievements, which are impressive. Konchalovsky skillfully uses camera angles, editing, and sound design to suggest the train's presence as a menacing beast. This is the one thing that seems to carry over strongly from Kurosawa's original plan. The train is the real star. Kurosawa came out of Hollywood with his reputation in shambles. Arguably, his own working methods were at least partially to blame for this. His unshakable stubbornness and colossal perfectionism were not exactly compatible with an American studio mentality. It had earned him notoriety even before his Hollywood venture. The Japanese press had given him the nickname, the Emperor. Now that the Japanese industry was deep in recession and major studios were starting to declare bankruptcy, making films of the scale and artistry of Kurosawa's became next to impossible. In response, he formed his own company, with fellow directors Masaki Kobayashi, Kaisuke Kinoshita, and Kon Ichikawa, called the Club of the Four Knights. Together, they planned to produce each other's films, using the profits from one film to finance another. First up was Kurosawa, who delivered a rather strange and experimental piece called Dodeska Den. The story was episodic, portraying the tragic lives of residents of a junkyard slum. By Kurosawa's standards, it was filmed quickly and cheaply, without many of his usual collaborators, some of whom, like Toshiro Mifune, he would never work with again. Dodeska Den finally gave Kurosawa the chance to work with color film stock, and he designed the visuals to contrast imaginatively with the grim story. The film frequently looks more like a fairy tale than a realistic drama, and this suggests the hopefulness of the inner lives of the characters. The film is touching and beautiful, one of the more underrated works of Kurosawa's career. It failed on its initial release, and the Club of the Four Knights disbanded. It didn't look like Kurosawa would ever make another film. So, on December 22nd, 1971, he attempted to take his own life. Kurosawa cut himself with his razor 6 times across the throat and 8 times across his wrists, and would have bled to death if his maid hadn't discovered him in time. Kurosawa was always reluctant to discuss his personal life, but there is much evidence to suggest that he was a very haunted man. When he was 13, his older brother Haigo took him to view the devastation wrought by the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923. Kurosawa witnessed the horror of the disaster firsthand. When he tried to look away from the countless bodies, his brother forced him to hold his gaze. Young Kurosawa never forgot this experience. 10 years later, Haigo committed suicide. Enduring such traumas as this, not to mention the terror of the war years, probably left a lasting mark on Kurosawa. His workaholic tendencies and extreme perfectionism might have been a sort of coping mechanism, suppressing or perhaps channeling his emotional demons. When he lost his creative outlet, Kurosawa had difficulty functioning. According to Kurosawa's longtime assistant, Teruyo Nogami, in her wonderful book Waiting on the Weather, the years following Dodeska Den were incredibly difficult. Kurosawa received an offer from the Soviet Union to direct a film for them in 1973. He jumped at the chance to get back behind a camera. In 1975, he released Dersu Uzala, an epic period drama based on the life of a native hunter and his lasting friendship with a Russian officer, exploring the region he calls his home. It starts as a rugged adventure film, but the tone grows elegiac and somber. The ending is the saddest Kurosawa ever shot. The movie was made under severely challenging conditions in the Siberian wilderness. It was Kurosawa's only time working in the 70mm format, and the large equipment only added to the problems. Nogami remembers the director drinking heavily throughout the production. His behavior was erratic, and his temper was short. Dersu Uzala was likely the single most troubled production of his career, and it took an enormous toll on the then 65-year-old director. Although it was successful and won the Soviet government an Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film, Kurosawa's hopes for financing more Russian productions went unfulfilled. Throughout the late 70s, Kurosawa spent more time at home and grew closer to his family, which helped him recover. He continued working on scripts, writing Kagemusha, Ran, and an unmade adaptation of Edgar Allan Poe's The Masque of Red Death during this time. He assumed none of these films would ever be made, and tried to realize his visions instead as paintings. In 1978, astonished at Kurosawa's inability to raise funding, George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola, two of the most powerful directors in Hollywood, set up a deal for Kurosawa at 20th Century Fox, coincidentally the same studio that had once hired him to direct Tora, Tora, Tora. This helped Kurosawa stage a defiantly grand career revival. Kagemusha was released in 1980, winning Kurosawa the Palme d'Or at Cannes. Ran followed in 1985, earning him an Oscar nomination for Best Director. Kurosawa was able to find support for these movies mainly in the West. French producer Serge Silberman, who helped make most of the last films of the great Spanish director Luis Buñuel, backed Ran, and Steven Spielberg was instrumental in securing Warner Brothers' support for the boldly unconventional Dreams. These movies, in particular Kagemusha and Ran, were the darkest and most despairing of Kurosawa's career. Their stories lament over the cruelty of fate, the pain of hubris, and the mindless destruction wrought by human pride and avarice. It's likely a reflection of the anger and depression that almost consumed the director at his lowest point in the early 70s. What's interesting, though, is that making these films seemed to restore some of his optimistic humanism. His last two movies, Rhapsody in August and Madadeo, made in the early 90s, when the director himself was approaching 90 years of age, were both gentle character pieces. Kurosawa made them with all the effortless skill a lifetime of movie making had taught him. The sweetness of these movies suggests that in spite of all his hardship, he was grateful to still be alive and still making films. He would have made more if he'd been able. In his final years, Kurosawa was working on The Sea is Watching. The story took place in a brothel overlooking the sea, and revolved around the day-to-day lives of sex workers in the 18th century. It would have climaxed with a dramatic flood sequence. When it looked like the film might be too expensive, Kurosawa started work on a more modest screenplay called After the Rain. His health started declining in 1995, and the final act came to a close in 1998. Kurosawa passed away at the age of 88. Both of his last projects were completed after his death. Takashi Koizumi filmed After the Rain in 1999, and Kei Kumai made The Sea is Watching in 2002. There's no question that Kurosawa could be a difficult man to work for. Even so, he was a great artist. His films contributed so much to the history of Japanese and world cinema. The negative impact of his mid-career failures and professional missteps seemed far more than he deserved. I think there's a larger lesson to be learned here. No matter what anyone may or may not deserve, life usually has other plans. Kurosawa suffered great misfortune, but in a lot of ways, he was lucky. He could have died in that suicide attempt. He could have turned his back entirely on the film industry and never made another film. He didn't. He lived, and he kept working. When the industry no longer supported him, his fellow artists stepped in to lend a helping hand. Kurosawa gave everything to his filmmaking. Through his films, he gave to the world. When he needed it, the world gave something back. That doesn't always happen, but if we give up hope, then it never happens at all. I think in some way, Kurosawa knew how lucky he was. He got to leave behind a priceless body of work, and today, we are lucky that it remains with us.